And so I'd like to introduce Barb Fullerton, who's the National Educational Manager at Little Green Pharma, and she's going to talk about medicinal cannabis. And Your Questions Answered is the title of her presentation. Now, Barb is the Head of Education and Distribution at Little Green Pharma, and this is Australia's first company to produce locally grown and made medical cannabis products. For the last 4 years, she's overseen the company's education strategy and product development. Barb is passionate about making a difference in the lives of patients and loves to talk to doctors and patients to advocate for better access to medical cannabis. Barb is also on a mission to educate others nationally and to change some of the outdated legislation around the treatment option, focusing currently on the THC drug testing in relation to driving. So welcome, Barb, and thanks for joining us on screen.
Thanks for having me. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. So yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but one of the blessings of COVID, I think, is the advent of online Zoom and all these sorts of things. So I will get started. So I guess it's important to understand the context of medicinal cannabis. And I like talking a little bit about the history. It's been used for thousands of years. The earliest, I guess, known recordings of it was a Chinese pharmacopoeia, which is thousands of years old. And it was used legally until the early 1900s. Then something changed, and I won't go into this in too much detail, and it's horrendous when you read it. But essentially what happened in the US was prohibition of alcohol ended, and there was a whole department looking for a new public enemy, and that's when the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 was introduced. And the American Medical Association actually stood up in front of Congress and said, this is an important medication and needs to be accessed by patients. And it was then, because of pressure, government pressure, and looking for a new public enemy in the US, it was then added to the Narcotics Act of, I think, 1962, which banned medical cannabis globally at that point. So that's when a lot of the research halted. There's a lot of misconceptions around medical cannabis, and one of them is around the toxicity of it and the risk of overdose. So if you look at alcohol as an example, if it's 1 in 10, so for example, if 4 drinks would get you drunk or happy, 40 could potentially kill you. So the lethal toxicity of cannabis is 1 in 20,000. So it's actually impossible to overdose. And there's also a very low dependent risk when you're looking at things like caffeine or comparing it to alcohol. So it's 0.8. And this study was done using recreational cannabis, which is typically higher in THC, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So from a safety profile, it's a very safe medication. In terms of, I guess, the history and understanding that in a bit more detail, it was used in the early 1900s, but there wasn't much known about it. They didn't understand how it worked or why it worked. This gentleman up in the corner is Raphael Mechoulam, and he is, I call him the grandfather of medicinal cannabis, because he took the time to really understand the plant in a lot more detail and isolated THC for the first time in the 1960s. He then advocated for research to be able to be done in the 80s and in 90s. In Israel, it was then used for the first time for medical use, and there's a lot of really great studies that have come out of Israel. We knew then how it was working with THC, but we didn't know what body systems it was working on. So we all have our own endocannabinoid system and produce endogenous cannabinoids. So if you go for a run or do exercise, that high that you feel is actually your body's own THC, for example. It was then used it's legalized in 49 out of 50 states in the US in different areas for different reasons. Canada's legalized it, Australia legalized it in 2016, and then Canada for recreational in 2018. It's important to understand as well that in all of those countries, the legalization has been very much a patient-led movement. And this is a picture of Dan Haslam and Lucy Haslam. Lucy Haslam today is still very much an advocate for patient access to medical cannabis in Australia. And this is his son, Dan. So Lucy is a nurse. Her husband was a police officer or is a police officer, and their son, Dan, was diagnosed with bowel cancer in his early 20s. And they found medical cannabis worked really well for him for his symptom management. It helped him put on weight. It helped him sleep better. It reduces anxiety. And most importantly, It reduced his pain levels. Now, they unfortunately, Dan passed away in 2015, but in 2016, that's when it was legalized here in Australia. And the law that was passed was called Dan's Law. So talking a little bit more about medical cannabis, it's a plant and a medicine, but it's also not a single molecule. So there are many bioactive components in the cannabis plant and the cannabis flower, and we aim to capture all of that in the medicine. So there's over 500 active ingredients, including THC and CBD, which you've probably heard of. But there's also
hey Barb,
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
The sound's a little bit disjointed.
Okay.
And you're speaking quite fast.
Okay,
and
I can slow down.
It's a little bit tricky to pick up the presentation, and you're obviously saying some really important things.
Let me try and
hotspot. Want to catch everything.
Let me try and hotspot to my phone.
You need time to.
Sorry, just give me a second.
So just give us 2 secs to see if we can.
For CBD for anxiety have skyrocketed, and I'll show you some of those stats in a minute. The most common side effects for cannabis are, doctors will tell you the most common are things like dry mouth. Some patients, if they try and titrate too quickly and move up, might feel a little bit of dizziness or drowsiness. But with cannabis, the titration process is start low and go slow, so your body adjusts. Interestingly, there's some data that came out of the US, and we're doing a talk later tonight about it, in the effect of cannabis on opioids, because how cannabis is processed through the body system, it actually allows you to reduce reliance on opioids. And in the US, in some data that they looked at in states where cannabis was legalized, they noticed a reduction in opioid prescriptions, in overall dosage, and importantly, they noticed a big reduction in opioid-related hospitalizations, as well as overdose. So there's some interesting research being done in that space at the moment. Understanding, I guess, how many people are accessing medical cannabis, it's quite a lot. There's been over 170,000 approvals for medical cannabis through one pathway, that's the SASB pathway, since it was legalized. But as you can see by this graph, every month it's growing month on month. So it's growing exponentially. So that doesn't mean there's 170,000 individual patients, because those approvals are required if you're changing medication, as well as if you're on multiple medication. So we estimate the number of patients to be probably around 65 or 70,000. There's different forms of medical cannabis. Oil is still the most popular way that it's taken. There's also flower, which is the fastest growing category. Flower is used for things like breakthrough pain. Some people are using it for insomnia or sleep. And it's also available in things like capsules. But again, oil is the most popular. The different onset of action. So when you're using vaporized form of cannabis, it's a very quick onset, which is why it's used for breakthrough symptoms, whereas ingested has a much longer, almost like a slow release medication, which is why it's a more popular form. So again, the main uses in Australia are pain. So about 65% of the applications or approvals are for pain. Then anxiety. This used to be cancer-related symptoms and palliative care, but that's actually dropped down. But that pain is a broad category and does include things like cancer pain. So chronic pain is a very classic default that doctors use when they have to pick a reason that they're prescribing it. So that will include a lot of cancer pain in there. There's a lot of research in terms of cancer symptom management. I won't go into that in too much detail, and sorry, this slide doesn't look great, but there's a lot of evidence around the reduction in cancer symptoms for patients taking it. There's not research around cancer, killing cancer cells or things. That's all preclinical, so that none of that has been done in patients. But there was a study shown recently for glioblastoma multiforme where it improved the cancer symptoms, and in some patients, I can't remember if it was statistically significant in terms of longevity. So what is the best formulation? There's lots of different formulations of cannabis with different THC and CBD ratios. And that depends on what it's being prescribed for. So typically the balanced products equal THC and CBD is a starting point if you're looking at it for pain. If for CBD dominant products, that's usually more for anxiety related issues. And if you have to drive, unfortunately, a CBD only product is probably the best option, because at the moment, patients are not legally supposed to drive with THC in their system, even though it's been prescribed. So there's a lot of debate about that, and we're lobbying the government pretty hard on that at the moment, because cannabis has been excluded. It's the only prescription medication where you can't actually drive. So that's being lobbied at the moment. What patients are eligible for cannabis? So you need to have tried other medications first. So it can't be a first-line treatment, although the TGA will approve it if you refuse other treatments. So if you don't want to take opioids, they don't, you've taken them in the past or just flat out refuse, the TGA will still approve it for chronic pain. But typically it's when other treatments have failed or caused unacceptable side effects is the most common pathway. So who can prescribe it? At the moment in Australia, we lobbied really hard a couple of years ago. So any doctor, any general practitioner is able to prescribe cannabis. They might just not know how, because most general practitioners don't use the special access pathway. But there's any medical cannabis company, including Little Green Pharma, can assist doctors with that process. Oh gosh, sorry, this slide doesn't look great either. So how are they accessing it? As I touched upon before, it's through this special access scheme. And there's a website, and it's very simple to navigate that. And that's something that we help doctors with every day. So essentially, the doctor prescribing process is they assess the suitability of the patient. They consider a ratio, so they have to choose which product they're going to prescribe. They then put in an application. They look at the dosing. Again, as I said before, it's start low, go slow. They do regular monitoring until you reach a stable dose. That will usually take about a month. And then if it's not working as it should, or there's side effects, they'll either change or cease the medication. So at the moment, probably most doctors will tell you probably about 70% of patients respond really well, and 20 to 30% aren't responding, which is like any medication. And that's an example of what a typical doctor, how they would monitor you. So usually they would get you back after the first week or two, and then 2 to 4 weekly. Driving, as I said, at the moment, we can't, it's not, if you have THC in your system, your doctor will tell you not to drive. The reality is most patients are driving with THC in their system if they're prescribed it medically. But the doctor, to protect themselves, will tell you not to drive. And there is lobbying happening, this drive change, as well as some local lobbying going on here in WA. So we're aiming to change that in the next 12 months. So what's the cost? Again, when medical cannabis first came out, it was extremely expensive. And Little Green Pharma proudly, we benchmarked our pricing off of the black market or the green market. So our message was, if a patient can get it legally, they shouldn't pay more than if they were getting it illicitly. So that's how we benchmarked our pricing. Since then, since we launched our first product almost 4 years ago, the price has come down a lot, which is great to see. And some insurance companies are reimbursing. And I recommend you, if you have questions about whether your health company is reimbursing, there's a really good list on Honolulu that you can look up. We also, Little Green Pharma formed a relationship with HIF, where they refund an additional $25 for every Little Green Pharma script, when we're looking at partnering with more health insurers that way as well. Other ways to access discounted medication are through studies. There's a quality of life study that we've partnered with the University of Sydney, where we offer subsidized medication. And there's also a compassionate access program that a lot of companies have, like Little Green Pharma, where we offer medication at no cost. So there's definitely different ways to access it depending on your circumstances. It's important to understand the difference between medical and illicit cannabis. They're not the same thing, and I'll take you quickly why. If you look at products that are sold legally, like in the US, where it's legal in 49 out of 50 states, when they did studies on what was on the label and how accurately those products were labeled, between 69 and 83% of the products tested were inaccurately labeled. So that's almost 8 market in the UK where CBD is able to be sold over the counter. 6 out of 10 products were inaccurately labeled. 4 out of 10 of those products had less than 50% of what was on the label. So the active ingredients were less than half. And importantly, almost half of those products had measurable levels of THC. So if you're buying that product in the UK and taking it and pulled over for driving, you might show a positive test if you just taken it. The other thing to be wary of is cannabis is very absorbent. It's so absorbent, it was used after Chernobyl to pull the radiation out of the soil. So patients getting it from their mate, Jane down the road, who's growing it organically in her backyard. Ted, who lived there before, may have loved pesticides. So that plant would be pulling those pesticides out of the soil that are still in there. And if that plant grows, that cannabis plant grows and goes to seed, goes to seed, 3 generations later, those pesticides will still be in that plant. So it's really important to understand the risks of what that cannabis that's grown illicitly can have in it. And particularly for immunocompromised patients that are going through chemotherapy and have low immunity, aspergillus is very commonly grown or commonly appears on cannabis plants. It's something that we need to test for regularly with our plants. And in immunocompromised patients, that can lead to pneumonia, which can be life-threatening. So just a buyer beware. I'll take you quickly through the cultivation process so you can understand that. So we were, as I said, the first grower in Australia. We grow in the southwest, somewhere in that circle. I can't tell you why, because we don't, just to keep the people that work there safe. We grow from mother plants or clones. So we take cuttings from our mother plants and plant them. The cultivation process, depending on the strain that we're growing, takes between 10 and 14 weeks. In that facility, we grow indoor and we control everything about the plant, the lighting, humidity, and temperature, including the water and nutrients. And that's to get a more consistent product. Looking at the trichomes of the plant where we get the resin from that we turn it into the medicine, we want it to look slightly cloudy with little touches of amber through there. And then we know it's ready to harvest. And coming up to harvest, it's always depending on when that plant gets to that stage. It's not a set date. It's then dried in a GMP facility. And we target the moisture levels to between 15 and 20%. We then send it off for its first test where we're testing for aflatoxins, foreign matter, heavy metals, pesticides, aspergillus, as I said before, to make sure that it's safe to turn into a resin. We then take those trichomes and we extract them using ethanol extraction or CO2. And that's where we get that whole plant extract. So we're taking that whole resin and converting it. Once we get that resin, it looks like a sticky sort of honey material. We send it off for its second test, and that's how we know how much THC and CBD is in that product, so we can mix. We then take the resin, we mix it with an MCT oil, and we bottle the medication, and then we send it off for its third test to ensure that it's plus or minus 10% of what the label claim is, as with any pharmaceutical medication. So that's the process, and that's all done in a GMP facility. The flower processing is similar, but a little bit more laborious. It involves burping, which is a hilarious term, which is really around making that moisture from the inside of the plant spread evenly throughout it. It's then trimmed, burped again, and then goes to final packaging. So that whole process takes about 3 weeks. There's some talk around sativa and indica, and there was a study recently. Sativa is typically thought to be a plant that's more wakeful, whereas indica is used more in the evening for sleep. And that's really dependent on the terpene profile. The reality in these day and age is if a plant looks like a sativa plant, it doesn't mean that it has sativa properties, and same with indica. And there was recently a study that confirmed that. So it's used more from a marketing sense. In that respect, and it's not true to form. So just be careful of that. For example, indica oils, if they might have terpenes that are synonymous with an indica plant, but it doesn't mean that it's going to help you sleep because they might not actually be present. And when you're taking an oil, the terpenes aren't effective in that way. It's only if you're inhaling the plant. So just buyer beware if you are looking at a specific type of cannabis flower. So I'll just touch upon some of our current research products that Little Green Pharma has undertaken. I touched upon the Quest initiative, which offers subsidized medication. It's a quality of life evaluation study, so patients enrolled just need to fill out questionnaires. We supply product to the New South Wales Care Trial, which is an open label prospective clinical trial. We also supply product to Medcan 1 and Medcan 2, which are 2 double-blind placebo-controlled studies with patients in advanced cancer. And that's looking at symptom management out of Queensland. There's also a refractory pain trial that we are doing, and we're about to launch a fibromyalgia trial. So I guess just to sum up, at Little Green Pharma, we're here to help. If you have any questions, you can give us a call. There's also some really great resources online at Green Choices, as well as through the Little Green Pharma product portal for doctors. And if your doctor is open to prescribing but doesn't know what to do or how to do it, I would encourage them to contact us, because we can help them get to where they need to be and understand the process in a lot more detail. And I'll leave it there and open it to questions.
Well, good. Thank you, Barb. That was very good. And sorry to everybody in the room. We had a few problems with hearing everything, but the slides explained very well. Did anybody have any questions? We'll just get a microphone to the lady so that you can hear.
Hey, I just wanted to ask, but particularly with reference to that last slide, there didn't appear to be a lot of randomized trials done, or sort of placebo versus treatment trials. Most of them seem to be open label. Is that a correct perception, or have I got that wrong?
There are definitely double-blind placebo-controlled trials being done, absolutely, and that's across a lot of different disease states. I think the issue with cannabis in general is I always say it's not like a company has invented one molecule and then is taking that product through to registration. So you've got lots of companies around the world doing different types of trials. So for example, the Mater trial going on in Queensland, that is double-blind placebo-controlled trial. There was one recently done for chemotherapy-induced nausea vomiting. The results were published last year out of University of Sydney, in Sydney that was done. So there definitely are double-blind placebo-controlled trials going on. It's just the cost for a lot of cannabis companies to participate in them. They're not as cash rich as some of the bigger pharmaceuticals. But there's a definitely collective data, and if you were to the meta-analyses that have been done on the data available do show, for example, that there's strong evidence in pain and chemotherapy-induced nausea vomiting, as well as cancer symptom management. There's strong evidence there. There was also a question
online.
Yeah, I saw that one. So that one's, do you have to go to a particular doctor to get prescribed? The answer is no.
Hi, Barb. There's a question from Diana online asking, do you have to go to a particular doctor to get prescribed?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is no. Any doctor can prescribe medical cannabis. However, they might not feel comfortable or know how to do it. So if they're open to it but don't know what to do, I would encourage them to contact a producer like Little Green Pharma, and we can walk them through that process. If they're not comfortable prescribing it, I would encourage you to get in touch with, again, someone like Little Green Pharma. And we have a network of doctors that are open to prescribing, and a lot of them are doing telehealth. So, but technically any doctor can prescribe. It's just if they're willing or able to.
Any more questions? Oh yeah, we've got another question for you. Oh.
Hi, I wasn't actually going to ask a question, but I was just going to comment. I use medicinal cannabis and have done for a couple of years now, and started taking it for pain. The first thing that I noticed was oh my God, my nausea had gone. I didn't realize just how awful I felt all of the time until I'd been taking the oil for 2, maybe 3 weeks and was gradually increasing the dose. My pain, I am now on a pitifully small dose of Targin. I don't nap every day during the day. So my life has been, it's been revolutionized, transformed by using it. So it isn't a randomized controlled trial. It's only a trial of 1. I'm assuming that it actually works because my other half, who's here with me today, he had a severe knee injury and couldn't drive. So I had to stop my cannabis so that I could be the designated driver. And my symptoms returned. I felt so awful. I couldn't wait for him to be able to drive again. And I'm back to being a rejuvenated me. So it may not work for everyone, but I'm definitely a convert. I was skeptical to start with, but my God, yes, it's good. Thanks.
Oh, that's so wonderful to hear.
Just a question. I think I understand that with something like Silver Chain, for instance, they won't provide the service if you want to use that. They're not going to be part of that relationship. So is there any dialogue or authorization for that so that can be accepted, or how does that work? Why aren't they able to use it without feeling like they can't, you know?
So just so I'm clear, will they not prescribe it, or will they not help you take it if it was prescribed by someone else?
Won't give you this if you decide you want to take cannabis oil for your treatment, they will be unable to continue their service with you. Well, without around that.
That's outrageous. I mean, if you get in touch with me outside of this forum, or if I can grab your details and get a bit more information, I mean, that's horrendous. It's a legally prescribed medication. So there's no reason legally, if anything, they would be at fault, I would imagine, if that's what's happening, because it's a legally available medication. So there's no reason that they should not dispense. That doesn't sound right. But happy to explore that, because that's not right.
Any other questions? No. Okay, thank you, Barb, very much for your time. That was really interesting. And I think, oh, sorry, we've got another one online. I'm just getting the microphone.
Question from someone in the rural areas saying, how do you supply it to patients? Australia Post, or does it need to be sent to the local hospital and then dispensed in the rural setting?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So cannabis is not something that is kept on the shelf in pharmacy because it's an unregistered product, which means it's not listed on the Australian Register for Therapeutic Goods. So it can be dispensed by any pharmacy. It just means that they don't usually have it on their shelf. So they have to order it in, and it's usually next day delivery. Little Green Pharma has a partnership with Oxford Compounding here in WA, and they store and distribute a lot of our medications, and they will post medication to a lot of patients, particularly in rural settings, as you said, who prefer to get it sent directly to them. So that's definitely an option. So it's dispensed through pharmacy like any other pharmaceutical. If you do go to the pharmacy with your script, you'll have to usually wait a day for it to be ordered in. And then if you are in WA and you have a script from a WA doctor, it can be posted to you as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Barb, again for your time. It was very good. And if we can just say thanks and give her a clap.